Hi, everybody. So tonight I'm going to give you a sort of overview of COVID-19 related philately, and it's going to be pretty broad. And I've been updating, I made the talk maybe a couple of weeks ago, and I've been updating my slides every day because there's new stuff coming out all the time. So this is certainly, by any means, it's not comprehensive. It would be impossible to kind of talk about everything that's out there, but I kind of wanted to give you a flavor of what's out there and, give you some information, some interesting tidbits about the different things that I've found. And there's all kinds of stuff that you can find on the internet through Facebook, through Instagram. There's a few dedicated blogs that have a lot of information. If you look on eBay or on Del Camp, you'll see lots of stuff being offered for sales. So I've gathered the information from all different sources, and I'll put a list. I have a list on my last slide that has some of the sources there. So you can go and dig out stuff after on your own and hunt for all these different things. So I'm going to just, so I've divided the talk into 4 sections. One, I'm going to spend maybe just 5 minutes just giving you some of the medical background about COVID-19, what's this pandemic all about? And then 3 sort of philatelic broad areas. So the first one, I'll just talk about the kind of postal history or mail. We're living through a really amazing time where things are really going to change. And once we come out the other side of the pandemic, who knows what society is going to look like? I don't think it's going to look the same as before the pandemic. And there's a lot of interesting postal history, and we're kind of living in the middle of it right now. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to collect. And then I'm going to just give you an overview of the COVID-19 stamps, the official stamp issues that have come out, plus some other sort of less official stamp issues, personalized stamps, and some other sort of related stuff. And then the last part will just be about some of the postmarks and pictorial cancels, meter mail, things like that. I'm hoping the talk is going to be about half an hour or so. I haven't really timed it from beginning to end, but I'll try not to talk too long so that we have time at the end for questions. So like Klaus said, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat or just drop them down and we can do questions at the end. Okay, so just to get started, so just a little sort of introduction to COVID-19. So what are coronaviruses? So coronaviruses are actually called coronaviruses. They got their name because of this sort of appearance of spikes around the outside of the cell, so a crown or a corona. And coronaviruses were sort of initially identified in the 1960s, and it's a very large family of viruses. They account for a significant proportion of the common cold. And there are 4 different sort of common human coronaviruses that circulate around, and most of us have been exposed to them at some time or another, and they circulate continuously, and you get the common cold and they mutate a little bit, and you catch the cold again the next year or the year after. And so those don't really cause a lot of significant disease, but rarely there are coronaviruses that start off in animals and then they can mutate and evolve and become new human coronaviruses. And because they're new to humans, they can cause unexpected disease. So the first one that we saw was SARS back in 2002. So SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. And it had about a 10 to 15% mortality rate, but the outbreak, even though it was global, it actually didn't affect a lot of, or a very high number of people because it would cause pretty severe disease. And when you got sick, you couldn't really be out and about spreading it. And then there was MERS, and actually many of you might not even have heard of MERS because it was really limited to the Middle East. So it was Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, caused a little localized outbreak in 2012, very high mortality rate, about 1 in 3 people who got it died, but again, not very high numbers overall because it was so limited. And now we're in the COVID-19. So SARS-CoV-2 is the new coronavirus, or the novel coronavirus disease, and it's much less virulent. So the disease is typically very mild in most people, and the mortality rate, we're still kind of in the middle of it. So it's not really certain what the true mortality is, but it's probably somewhere in the range of 1 to 5%. So a lot less virulent than the other 2. And just for comparison, seasonal influenza which is caused by a different kind of virus that has about 0.1% mortality. So when you hear people say, well, it's like the flu, actually the flu is much less virulent than coronavirus overall. The number of people who die from it is much less. So here's the timeline of what's been happening. So the first cases were reported in Wuhan, China, sometime in December, sort of cases of unknown or pneumonia of unknown cause. And then in January, this new or novel coronavirus was identified as the cause. Towards the end of January, the WHO declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, not yet a pandemic. And then the virus actually got its official name on February 11th. It was named SARS-CoV-2 because it was related to SARS-CoV-1, which was the first SARS virus. And then the disease was called COVID-19, standing for Coronavirus Disease 2019. And then finally, on March 11th, WHO declared it a pandemic. It was obvious where this was heading. And soon after, here in Ontario, Ontario just declared a state of emergency, which at this time has been extended to June 30th. And it's uncertain how it will be extended. Some parts of Ontario are starting to open now, but not Toronto, where we're still having new cases every day. So why has this become such a big global pandemic? Well, it's spread rapidly, and there's sort of a perfect storm of characteristics of this virus. So first of all, it causes mild disease in most people. So people can be asymptomatic, or you can just have the sniffles and you don't feel very sick, so you can go out and about in the community and you can spread it. Whereas if you were really sick, you'd be in hospital and you wouldn't be out spreading it. It's also highly contagious. So the R0 factor is greater than 2, meaning that every person who has it tends to spread it to more than 2 people. So the disease kind of spreads exponentially. A lot of people are traveling all over the place. The virus started in China, but very quickly spread to other countries because we can travel everywhere now by plane very easily. And there's no pre-existing immunity. So it's a new virus. We've never seen it. Nobody's immune to it. And therefore, everybody's susceptible to it. And that's why it's been spreading everywhere. And so these are the numbers. This website gives you, every day you can look, and they've updated the numbers. So I updated it today. There's been almost 7.5 million people worldwide been reported as affected or infected with COVID-19. Almost 500,000 deaths, and about 3.5 million people have recovered. So just for comparison, the first SARS outbreak was just over 8,000 cases and 774 deaths. And the MERS outbreak was only 2,500 cases with over 800 deaths. So the numbers were much, much smaller. And then going back and looking at the Spanish flu, which was 1918, shortly after the end of World War I, at that time, they had 500 million cases, which was a third of the world's population at that time, and 50 million deaths. And, they implemented the same kind of public health measures that we're implementing now, right? Closing down public facilities and public gatherings and all kinds of stuff. And this is all in an attempt to do what we call flattening the curve, right? So it's spread by droplet and contact with contaminated surfaces. So if you do social distancing or physical distancing, you can decrease the rate of spread. And the reason to do that is because even though it causes mild disease in the majority of people, the important number here is not the relative number, but the absolute number, right? So if millions of people are infected, even if it's only 1% get very sick and need ICU and ventilators, that's huge numbers, and we just don't have that capacity in the healthcare system. So the reason to do these physical distancing measures is to delay or to mitigate, to slow down the spread so that the number of sick people who need ICU and ventilators doesn't overwhelm the capacity of our healthcare systems. And when you don't do measures like this, things happen like, in Italy, it was terrible. Like they just didn't have the capacity, and they had to make decisions like who to put on a ventilator, who not, so you just end up with impossible choices. And so Ontario actually took action very, very early on, and we've been actually managing the, we've had the capacity to manage the infection, to manage the pandemic. Okay, so that's enough for the medical stuff. So now I'm going to shift to philately. So the first part will just be sort of looking at the different ways that you can collect postal history that's related to the COVID pandemic. And like I said, you know, we're living through an amazing time in history. Today's mail is going to be tomorrow's postal history, right? 50 years from now, all the collectors are going to be looking for covers that had markings or routings that were related to the COVID pandemic. So what sorts of things can you collect? Well, so first of all, so I'm not going to really talk about disinfected mail. That's a whole other collecting area, and there's, you know, there's lots of information on the internet. There's a whole, you know, philatelic study group on disinfected mail, and there's lots and lots of stuff to collect from all the old infections like smallpox and cholera, et cetera, et cetera. And people thought that infections could be transmitted through mail, and so they went through all kinds of different shenanigans to disinfect mail. But the WHO has told us that there's really very little risk of COVID-19 being transmitted through the mail, and there's actually been no documented cases of infection, people getting infected through the mail. So there's, you know, been continued delivery of mail, and really the interruption in mail has been because of interruption of international travel and not because of fear of transmitting the infection. So there's no need to, you know, microwave your mail, although I actually found this on Facebook. Somebody did attempt to microwave their mail, not remembering that, of course, paper is flammable, right? So not a good idea to do that, but no need to disinfect your mail. And Canada Post has continued to deliver mail. So I took this picture yesterday, actually. I was at work downtown on University Avenue, and this truck was parked outside the hospital. So appropriate wrapping with the emergency responders issue, but they have this little sign up here, you know, for physical distancing. So Canada Post, and it's been very important for us because at this time of physical distancing, it's really important to try and stay in touch and not be socially distant. So letters in the mail is one way that we can keep in touch with everyone. And so Canada Post, I think, has played a really important role in helping people to stay in touch. But, you know, they've had to, so number one, they've had I think a huge increase in the number of parcels because a lot of people are doing online ordering now, and they have to implement social distancing at work. So you know, their ability to kind of work through that has been decreased. So there's been a lot of delays and stuff, but, you know, mail is getting through. So if you go to the Canada Post website, they have a page where you can see the list of countries that they're still delivering to. And this is because of the countries that they can't deliver to is because of restrictions on international travel. So if you go to a post office and try and mail a letter to a country that they're not accepting mail to, they won't accept it. But, you know, if you drop it in a mailbox, this is what happens. So I sent this letter to a collector in Malaysia who wanted to get the Canada Post slogan, thanking healthcare workers. And I'll talk more about that later in my talk. But actually, I didn't check the website before I dropped the letter in the mailbox, and they're not sending mail to Malaysia right now. So this bounced back to me after a week or so with a return to sender. And so once the route opens up, I'm actually going to send this entire cover to that collector. So for him, it's, you know, it's a really cool piece of postal history related to the COVID-19 pandemic. This has happened in other countries as well. So these are a couple of envelopes from Germany that were sent to countries that were returned with this hand stamp, basically saying return to sender, postal traffic to the destination country is currently interrupted and resumption is currently not foreseeable. So this is a nice hand cancel and a nice piece of postal history to keep in your collection. There also may be hand stamps related to delayed delivery. So North Korea, this is a picture that I got on Facebook. North Korea sends out new issues to their subscribers, but they were holding all the mail until the flights resumed, and all of the mail that eventually got sent out, I don't actually know if it's been sent out yet, but eventually when it gets sent out, it'll have this delayed delivery due to COVID-19 hand stamp. So that's a nice cachet to collect as well. And then other than return and delayed covers, there's also sort of more tangential things that you could potentially collect. So there's a lot of events that have been canceled because of COVID-19. So not only stamp meetings, so a lot of stamp meetings and stamp shows have been canceled, but also non-philatelic events. So this one was a picture that I found on Facebook, was a collector that had sent away to get a special cancel, I think it was on April 18th at this powwow station. And the launch was canceled because of COVID-19. And so the letter was returned with this handwritten cancel due to COVID-19. So that's, that's a memento, I guess, of sort of the things that are happening with cancellations. And then, of course, many other events, sporting events, and other big gatherings have been canceled. One of the biggest, of course, is the Tokyo 2020 Olympics have been not canceled, but postponed to 2021. And a lot of countries had already planned and printed and issued stamps related to the Tokyo Olympics. So this is a postcard that a friend in Japan sent me with one of the stamps issued for Tokyo 2020. So even though there's nothing on here that says COVID-19, it's still another thing that you could potentially collect around events that have been canceled due to the pandemic. Even, what we might consider junk mail, right? So ad mail, this is a piece of ad mail from the Netherlands. It's actually postage paid. So it's a modern piece of postal stationery that could even be used in a thematic exhibit, but it's got a message on here, Corona crisis, we'll get through this together. So even your junk mail potentially could have postal history significance. Here in Canada, there's people that collect ad mail. So this is addressed ad mail. So companies can print ad mail with personalized indicia. So this is an envelope from World Vision. And even though the picture on the stamp itself doesn't really say anything about COVID, but there's a message, the message that's written on the envelope refers to the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic crisis. So this could be fit into a collection related to COVID-19. Here's one that's a little more direct. So this one is from Michael Garron Hospital Foundation. And the indicia itself actually has a picture related to COVID-19. So it's a picture of a healthcare worker wearing a face mask and a face shield, which is what they're doing now on the wards when they're dealing with patients who have potential infection. Several postal administrations have issued, in an attempt to try and keep people connected, sent out postage paid postcards to all the households to encourage people to write letters and postcards to each other. So Ireland was one place that did that. They called this Come Together and Right Now, or Come Together Right Now. So they sent actually two postcards. The postcards come together and you just separate them. And they're postage paid. They could be sent anywhere in Ireland, postage free. So I looked around on the internet to see if I could find a picture of one that had actually been sent through the mail. So I'm not sure this one went through the mail, but it was a little boy who wrote a message to his Nana. I love you. When the virus is over, I'm going to hug you and kiss you to death. Bye-bye. So, I think a lot of people are missing their grandparents and their grandchildren. So I think these are nice ways to kind of keep people collected. So Ireland did it. Here's one from Gibraltar. Again, they distributed these free to all the homes in Gibraltar, and they would deliver them free to any local address. And they encourage people to send these to anyone who would appreciate receiving it. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to some COVID-19 stamp issues, and I'll just start off with the official stamp issues. So stamps that have been issued by the country's postal administration. So the theme of these stamps usually falls into sort of three areas: thanking and honoring frontline workers, including medical workers and other first responders that have been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, raising funds to assist, so to help with the medical care, and also to help people that have been laid off and or unemployed and require financial assistance because of the distancing measures. And then also spreading messages of support and solidarity. So we know the postal system is a very important means of getting messages out to everybody. So the very first stamp issue was actually from Iran. And, Iran actually probably mismanaged the initial measures for dealing with the pandemic and were, criticized. But they, so this stamp might have been a way to kind of get back on the good side of sort of the medical people in that country. And they actually, the Iranian government actually announced that any doctors, nurses that would die while battling the coronavirus would be declared martyrs. So I guess that's sort of a cultural thing in Iran. But this stamp was issued to honor, and it's labeled national heroes. So this was the very first stamp that came out related to the COVID-19 pandemic on March 17th. So that was pretty fast, right? The pandemic was declared March 11th, and then the stamp came out on March 17th. So clearly had been planning it a bit before that. The next one was at the end of March from Vietnam, with the theme joining hands to prevent and combat COVID-19. And again, you see the medical workers and sort of messages of, let's get together, and all the people that are working to battle the pandemic. Vietnamese stamps are not very expensive, but they only printed 12,000 sets. So I think they're already sold out, but you can get them, like they're for sale on Delcamp and eBay, and you can get them through swaps on Facebook as well. This one's interesting. So this one was the first one from a European country, from Switzerland, and it was for COVID-19 solidarity. And you'll see the face value says 100 plus 500. So the postage value was 1 franc, or 100 cents. And 500 actually was just went straight to the Swiss Solidarity Fund and Swiss Red Cross. So it was split 50-50. So you could buy a sheet of 10, you can only buy them in sheets of 10. So sheet of 10 stamps had a face value of 60 francs, but it only cost you 50 francs. So you can see here, the price on the sheets is 50 francs. So all of that money went to the charities, and Swiss Post basically donated the 10 francs. So in essence, you were donating money to the charities, and in turn, Swiss Post gave you 10 stamps to send letters to 10 friends. So I think that's the first time that's ever happened, where you actually spend less money than the face value of the stamp. Isle of Man issued a set of 8 stamps in early May. So this was with the hashtag carry us through. So basically this was to basically send messages of how, or celebrating how they were dealing with the pandemic, and how everybody in their community was supporting each other, and the strength and solidarity of the Manx people. So they issued a set of regular gummed stamps, and also a set of ATM labels. And a part of the proceeds from the stamps went to the Manx Solidarity Fund. So a lot of, you'll see a lot of different countries would do this. So they'll donate part of the proceeds from the sale of the stamps to support the COVID. So this is another example. So this is from Morocco. Again, Morocco united against COVID-19. The stamp cost 3.75 plus 5 dirhams, and the 5 dirhams went to the special fund for management and response. And so the face value for postage was only 3.75. And actually, this is the first stamp that actually had a postal worker on it as one of the sort of frontline workers. So you see all the medical and, military and cleaners, but this one actually specifically had a postal worker as well. This one is from the United Arab Emirates. And again, part of the proceeds went to the Emirates Red Crescent, and part went to the Emirates Posts. They had their own dedicated COVID fund to support their own frontline workers. And you'll notice it's interesting, UAE issues different kinds of souvenir sheets, but the denomination is actually not on the stamp itself, but on the souvenir sheet. So you actually can't take the stamp out of the souvenir sheet and use it by itself on an envelope. You have to use the entire souvenir sheet. That's kind of a quirk of UAE. They often issue stamps and souvenir sheets like that. Okay, so this one's from China. So the pandemic started off in Wuhan, China. So and there's many collectors. And back when SARS happened, China issued a single stamp for the SARS outbreak, and that stamp, you can find it on eBay, but it costs quite a lot of money. So there was great anticipation to see what China would do. So we started to see pictures on social media sort of in mid-March. This was the first picture that kind of showed up, but then that was quickly withdrawn. And I think nobody kind of really knows for sure, but I think this is probably a preliminary design for the stamp that didn't end up being approved. And then in early April, this design appeared. So again, and the announced issue date was April 7th. But then this design also ended up getting withdrawn because I think people wanted some changes to it. And so it was withdrawn and they made some adjustments to it. And the final design didn't come out then until May 11th. And so here you can actually see there are some minor differences between the first design and the second design. So the symbol, the hammer and sickle symbol, was removed. There were some background images that were removed. The design of the mask, the face mask here was I guess made more accurate. This little guy here carrying a rifle, I think, is gone now. This lady is no longer wearing any head covering. This guy's looking at a computer screen instead of a microscope. The ambulance picture was changed a little bit, and actually COVID-19 was put into this little circle instead of just a picture of a virus. And they put a little heart perforation in between the pair of stamps. So the theme of the stamp was "Union is Strength in Fighting Against COVID-19." And the symbol in the middle is actually the Chinese symbol for public, which is made up of 3 symbols for the word person. So that's, I've seen comments where people said, well, if you break the stamps apart, you're kind of like breaking apart the people, but I don't think anybody would actually tear these stamps apart. So it's probably it's probably a moot point. And so if you actually, so there's this app in China called Alipay, which is used to pay a lot of, like you can use it for paying different services. And if you scan the stamp using Alipay, you get this little video. So this is courtesy of one of my friends on Facebook. Let me see if I can play this. So it just plays a little video on your phone. So next, Uruguay, and you can see that now the stamps are starting to come like fast and furious, right? Many countries are jumping on the bandwagon. So this is the National Plan for Coronavirus. We'll take care of each other. This one actually had a nice cancel for the first day cover with an image of a person wearing a face mask. You know, so for a thematic collector, if you're looking for things like, you know, a guy with a face mask, it's nice to find different kinds of philatelic elements. So stamps, here's a pictorial cancel with that. So nice to have this variety. This one's actually nice. The story behind this is, so in New Zealand, they did a thing called the teddy bear hunt, where they encouraged people to put teddy bears in their windows so that kids that were walking in the neighborhoods could look for the teddy bears. So a lot of people really got into this, and it became a huge thing. And so when they were planning the stamp issue, they actually asked people to send in pictures of all their teddy bears. And so they picked 6 of the teddy bears and the stories behind them to put on the souvenir sheet. And again, $3 from the sale went to the New Zealand Red Cross. This one's from the Ukraine. You know, so Ukraine, in addition to battling COVID-19, also has the military conflict in the Donbass region of Ukraine. So, you know, they kind of reference that, right? The medical people and the military people. And actually at the stamp launch, they had a pediatric infectious disease specialist and a military volunteer, in addition to the director of Ukraine Post at the stamp launch. This one's from Monaco. So this was words from a message by Prince Albert, who himself tested positive for COVID-19 in mid-March. So it's the patience, confidence, courage, and solidarity. And it's rather an ominous looking stamp. And I couldn't decide if this was actually a picture of Prince Albert on the stamp. This was sort of the closest picture I could find of him. So, I mean, you can decide for yourself if that's actually Albert or not. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's many, many more that have just been recently announced. So Bosnia's announced one. Czech Republic is coming out with a pair of stamps. Macau's issuing a stamp and a souvenir sheet. So, and I'm sure, you know, if this presentation was a week later, there'd probably be many others. So they're coming fast and furious now that postal administrations have had time to design stamps and issue them. So other than these sort of regular issued stamps, there's some countries have these sort of services where you can go online and print your own stamps. So in France, La Poste has this service called Mon Timbre en ligne, where you can go online and you can order. They have several sort of pre-designed, like designs that you can pick from, or you can upload your own design. But they added in April a couple of designs that were related to COVID-19. And so if you put them on your stamp, you know, you select the rate, all of your stamps get a QR code, or a barcode rather. And this is what the stamp looks like. You just print it and cut it out and stick it on your envelope. So the nice way to collect these is actually on real used mail, right? So here's a couple examples where they've actually gone through the mail. And these stamps, when they get canceled, they get this sort of set of 4 triangular parentheses. And here's an example of a letter that went through, or that was a domestic letter, and the stamp's been printed on a self-adhesive label. Or you can just print it on regular paper and glue it on your envelopes too. Liechtenstein Post has a service where you can also personalize stamps, but they also issue kind of official personal stamps as well. They call them collector sheets. So they issued actually a couple of stamps and a souvenir sheet on the theme of like trying to encourage people to write letters, right? So these say Idanka D, which is I'm thinking of you. And this one, the souvenir sheet says handwritten is personal and brings us closer together. So trying to encourage people to write letters to each other. And then there's a whole bunch of personalized stamps that you'll find images of that were designed and made by private individuals or groups. So this one from Bosnia was actually printed by a stamp and coin club in Sarajevo. There's been a few different ones from Indonesia. These two from Austria and Estonia were probably the same person. And it's interesting, the Estonia stamp actually has a message about Slovenia. And someone told me it was because Slovenia actually didn't allow people to make personalized stamps with COVID-related stuff. So the guy ended up doing it in Estonia. And I think the one from Spain here is from a stamp club as well. So these may not be widely available because they're usually printed off in sort of limited runs. And I know Trevor, I saw Trevor on the call. So that these are from Trevor Ashman, who's a collector in Medicine Hat, who does a lot of designing of personalized stamps. So in Canada, you can make picture postage. So Trevor's made stamps with a couple of different frames with an image of a medical worker and the coronavirus in the background. And this is his cover with a nice cachet customized for the stamp. And then other than actual stamps, so these are actually issued by the Bosnia Red Cross Society. So these are not actually real postage stamps, but the one on the left with the lower denomination was sort of used as a postal tax stamp. So on the week of May 8th to 15th, it was supposed to be mandatory on domestic letters that were mailed. So that would have been done in cooperation with the post office. And then the higher denomination stamp was actually just sold by Red Cross workers directly to people on the street to try and raise funds. And all the funds for the sale of these stamps went to the Red Cross Society. So I just want to say very briefly, because you'll see a ton of stuff out there that's kind of, I consider them sort of junk issues or wallpaper issues, but of course, I'm not going to tell anybody how to collect, but I just want to, you should make informed decisions. And these are stamp agencies. So Stamparija and IGPC are philatelic agencies that have contracts with the postal administrations of many different countries, mostly countries in Africa, but a few other places. And they produce stamps that are issued directly, or these are sold directly to the new issue or collector market. So they're sold direct to collectors, usually topical collectors. They have nothing to do with the country. If you actually went to the country where the stamp is supposedly issued, you would not be able to find them. They're never used on mail. And the countries for which they're supposedly issued don't see all of this money, right? So this is really just a money grab. They're often quite expensive. And many collectors would consider them sort of wallpaper and not really collect them. So I just want to give you, they're really quite exploitive and really have nothing to do with the topic that they're issuing on. So, this is an example of one that was issued supposedly by Sierra Leone. The penny black against COVID-19. What does the penny black have to do with COVID-19? And they've just put different styles of face masks on the penny black. And of course, you want to cater to the people who collect joint issues, right? So let's make some joint issues with Central African Republic and Togo, and let's just put different masks on the penny black. I just find this ridiculous. Here's another example, right? Oh, let's sell to people who collect weird shaped stamps, right? Here's a round stamp and a round souvenir sheet from Central African Republic, and let's make it a joint issue too. And oh, here's collectors that collect unusual kind of stamps. So here's a wooden stamp. And they even issued a stamp on a face mask, so you can even wear your stamps, right? Like, I mean, if you want to spend your money, that's fine. But for me, these would not be part of my collection. Here's some stamps or souvenir sheets from IGPC from different countries. And you can see the style is similar. They don't really put a lot of effort into the design, and they're just really, you know, if you go to these countries, you'll never find these stamps there. So, okay. So for the last, talked about half an hour. So for the last maybe 5 or 8 minutes, just going to show you some different like cancels and slogan cancels, meter marks, things like that. So the first one I'll just mention is from Croatia. So the Croat Post has scheduled a special pictorial cancel that was going to be used on March 25th in Zagreb. Unfortunately, 3 days before the scheduled launch, there was a big earthquake in Zagreb, which destroyed a lot of buildings, including the Central Post Office. And so they ended up postponing the issue and actually transferring it to a different post office, and it was issued on April 30th. But at the time, when they issued it, there was a lot of limitation on intercity travel. So actually a lot of collectors probably were not able to get it on the day of issue because of that limitation. And you'll notice that the postal code is different. So they had to change it to a different post office and change the date as well. But the message here is Croatia and the world against the coronavirus pandemic. You can see examples of this cancel that have been put on different postcards, and some of them are for sale on Del Camp that you can find. Malaysia, so in Malaysia, they implemented a movement, you know, so a lot of these messages are actually a way for the Postal Service to try and disseminate messages to the community, to try and encourage people to follow the social distancing and try and control the pandemic, right? So in Malaysia, they implemented what they call a movement control order on March 18th. And soon after, you started to see this postmark or this slogan cancel in the mail: "You stay at home, we deliver. Do your part to stop the spread of COVID-19, with the hashtag stay at home." So this was actually only used for a couple of days. And then they had the same slogan, but with the big, you know, no COVID-19. And they also added hashtag post for you. And this was started in late March. And I'm not sure actually how long it went on for. There's a collector, and I list the address of the blog at the end, but there's a collector that has documented all the different dates that these have been used. Singapore has quite a lot of, you know, so Singapore has a nice history recently of using different kinds of pictorial cancels for different occasions, centenaries and anniversaries and stuff like that. And their social distancing measures, they call it a circuit breaker. And so they implemented that on April 7th. And so at the same time, they started these slogan cancels. And there were 2 different slogan cancels that were used for periods of like sort of 2 weeks at a time. And then they were initially scheduled to go until the sort of middle of May. And then towards the end of April, they actually extended the measures until June 1st. So then they added this last cancel for the last couple of weeks. And here's some examples of the different cancels actually on covers. And you'll see that there's 2 different machines, C1 and C2, that correspond, I guess, to the first column here and the second column. So you can find some of these too on eBay, or try and get them from exchange partners in Singapore. Great Britain has had a few relevant slogan cancels. So their cancel actually tells people to stay home and protect the NHS, right? So to prevent that overwhelm, you know, don't overwhelm the capacity of the health services to treat people who are very sick. And that will help to save lives. And at the same time, the Royal Mail is keeping communities connected. So this was, these are 2 different examples, you know, one on the left and one on the right. And then they recently changed to this one where they also added in the anniversary, the 75th anniversary of VE Day. And then this is a nice story. So this is, I don't know if some of you may have heard this. So this is Captain Thomas Moore. He's a former British Army officer, and he wanted to raise funds. So, you know, this isn't sort of directly COVID-19, but, you know, he was raising funds for the NHS around the time of the pandemic. So, you know, you could incorporate that into part of the story in an exhibit about COVID-19. But he wanted to raise funds for the NHS, basically to thank them for treatment that he'd received for cancer and for a broken hip. And so his fundraising effort was he was going to do 100 laps of the 25-meter loop of his garden in Bedfordshire. And he did it in sort of 10 lap chunks, and he was going to end up on his 100th birthday, which was the 30th of April, but he actually finished well before that. But the fundraiser went on until the 30th of April, and he ended up actually raising more than 32 million pounds sterling for the NHS charity. And so he got his own special cancel, Captain Thomas More. He's actually now, I think, an honorary colonel. So he's actually now Colonel Thomas More, but then he was knighted on May 20th. So now he's Sir Thomas More. So this is a nice little cancel that was only used for a few days near the end of April. And there's other various ones. So I don't know too much about this one from Turkey. Evde kal means stay at home. This one in Ireland, so this has been used, I think, at all 3 different mail centers in Ireland. So, you know, that's not too hard to try and collect examples from all 3. And then this was one that I saw on Del Camp, and I also saw it on another blog. This meter slogan from Germany: keep your distance and stay healthy. And Germany, starting on July 1st, is actually going to start using this pictorial cancel on their machine cancelers at about, I think, 73 or over 70 different mail distribution centers. So there's going to be a gazillion to collect. So probably, you know, you might just want to get 1 or 2 examples of that. This is another one from Germany. This is actually, so Germany has quite a lot of private mail carriers. So this is one of them, Postmodern, which is based in Dresden, which is the capital of the state of Saxony. And the Saxon dialect there, I guess, is a bit different than regular German. So this letter was originally franked with this stamp, which is issued by Postmodern, but they put a label over it. So Klaus probably knows this, but this is Inch Fisch bitte, which in German would be 1,50 bitte, which is 1 meter 50 bitte, sorry, 1 meter and 50. So stay away from me by 1 meter and 50. And then so geht sächlich is this, that's how you say it in the Saxon dialect. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of fun things. Is that right, Klaus?
If I just can say, 1,50 bitte.
Okay.
That's how you say it, 1,50 bitte.
All right.
Yeah, Saxon dialect is a different, almost different language.
Yeah. And then there's, so this one from Australia Post, stay safe and connected Australia. So there's a handful of different mail centers in Australia. So you could, you know, it's feasible to get it from all the different centers there. And then, so I'm almost done now. So this one is one that Canada Post started using on May 1st. On all of their mechanically sorted letter mail. So I've been dropping letters into my local mailbox almost every day, like every couple of days, and they've all been coming back to me with this cancel. So, and it's interesting because, so if you look, this is the date stamp. So this is 2020, 05 is May, 12 is the date. So this was canceled on May 12th, and 2,200 hours. And then at the bottom, it says M4L, which is the Toronto center postal code, and then 38, I think this is 37 or 3808, I can't see it over the stamp, but that's the machine. So I've been getting from different machines actually, and the font is a little bit different from the different machines. So that's kind of an interesting little study I'm kind of doing for myself. So they started on May 1st. This was a picture I found on Del Camp for first day cancel that was sent to Dresden. And then just at the very end, I just wanted to show you this little video compilation that Canada Post put together. So Canada Post did a lot of sort of tributes to healthcare workers, you know, driving their vans by across, you know, different cities across the country. So this video is about a minute. I just wanted to play this for you guys. It's kind of a feel-good video. with that, I'll end off. So these are some of the sources that I used, some blogs and some of the collectors that helped me find stuff. Trevor sent me a couple of the examples of his picture postage stamp, lots of images from all over the internet and from philatelic friends around the world. So stay safe, everybody, and I'm happy to take any questions, or we can just have a general discussion about this collecting topic.